Hi, everyone. I'm Jane DeBose, and tonight I have the honor to introduce my friend and Belmonter, Sharon Brown Christopher. Sharon is a retired United Methodist bishop, and she served from 1988 to 2008. She's a native of Corpus Christi, Texas. She pastored churches in Wisconsin, and she served as bishop in the Illinois and Minnesota Episcopal areas. Sharon and her husband, Charles, are members are members of the friendship class here at Belmont, and Sharon is known for her amazing photography. You're in for a treat tonight, as Sharon will focus on photography as a spiritual discipline. The title of her presentation is Spirituality and the Art of Observation, Photography that Uses All of Our Senses. Now, before I turn it over to Sharon, I just want to make one program note, and that is that next week's session will be led by Joe Fields, who will be substituting for Susan Hayes. Susan is recovering from an unexpected surgery. But for tonight, welcome to Sharon. Thank you.
Hey, it's good to be here tonight, both here for those of you physically in the room and those of you who are with us virtually as well. The communion of saints surrounds us, and it's great to have all of you present tonight. I'm going to start with just a brief preamble and then just kind of get into it. And let me tell you a little bit. I'm going to move over here, but I'll take this with me so you can hear me. Oh, that'd be perfect. I would like that. Great. How about this? Is this?
There's another one back here. You got another? Yeah. Oh, that's my easy to work.
Thanks, Nick. Good. I think this will work. I think you can hear me and I can move, and I think we'll work it out together. Great. Thank you. Thanks to Nick for all his tech help. I'm appreciative. The image you have before you is an image of what I understand the Christian community to be all about. We are people who live in relationship with one another and with God and with all of creation, and we will the good of one another in mutual respect and love and justice, and we form and build connection. If I were to use one word to talk about what I'm about, it is connection. And that's a good Methodist word and a good John Wesley word as well, connection. And it's about our relationships and how we live together, and especially given what is happening in our world and in our nation in the last weeks and this last week. We are living in the midst of a lot of disconnection. And it is so important for us as a church to claim our identity as people of connection, of living together not only with ourselves, but with all people and with all of creation. So that's the context of what we're going to do tonight, is root ourselves in connection. And what I want to do is remind us that our mission as the United Methodist Church and Belmont United Methodist Church is increasing the love of God and neighbor. And my thesis for tonight is that noticing or observing or paying attention or seeing is the very first step of loving God and neighbor. So we're going to talk about noticing tonight, or another way to talk about it is we're going to talk about living with our eyes wide open. And what does that mean for us? And so my assignment, as I understand it, as it was given to me, is to explore observation as a spiritual practice. Observing, paying attention, noticing, seeing, sharpening our sight so that we might more deeply love God and neighbor and more deeply advocate for justice. So my reflections tonight are rooted in four wise ones, the communion of saints, or the benefactors who inform this conversation we're going to have with one another. They are, first of all, Socrates, who said, "An unexamined life is not worth living." And Jesus, "Happy are your eyes because they see." And Mary Oliver, the poet, who said, "Pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it." And our own Reuben Job, who said, "Do no harm, do good, and stay in love with God and neighbor." So those are the wise ones that are going to inform this conversation that we're going to have tonight. And I'm going to do four things. One, I'm going to tell you a bit of my own story, my own quirky story. I own it up front. It's a quirky story about my lifelong practice of noticing the divine spark that runs through the universe and its impact on my neighbor and on myself. And I will describe some of my tools. I will describe my practice of both verbal and visual journaling using the tools of ink and keyboard and camera. Okay, that's it in a nutshell. I'll tell my story. Then I'll share some images that illustrate my own noticing, visual images of noticing. Actually, I'll share some verbal images as well. And then I'll share, thirdly, some learnings I've had along the way. And last, I want us to talk about takeaways. What do we want to take away from this conversation for our own practice of observation? So that's what we're going to do. My goal is to pique your curiosity, to open your mind to new possibility, and deepen your practice of observation, noticing, and paying attention. So my invitation to you is to see and to hear and to glean any nuggets that might help you nurture your Christian journey of loving God and neighbor. My invitation to you is to see with eyes wide open. Okay, my story. Do any of you remember or know what an autograph book is? Or was? I'm not sure there are such things anymore. Mine was about this size, and I would take it to my teachers and my Sunday school teachers and everybody else and have them autograph it, my parents and my classmates, who would write things like, "You are too good to be forgotten." Remember that kind of message that we would get in the autograph book? Or "Roses are red, violets are blue, and you finish the poem however it came to you." I took an old autograph book of mine. It had a few used pages, but a lot of unused pages. And I took it, and then I went to my dad's closet and took a belt of his. Actually, I first took a new belt of his, and he quickly helped me understand I needed to take an old belt of his. I took an old belt of his, and I took my autograph book and a pencil and his belt, and I climbed the sycamore tree in the front yard of our house. And up in the top of that tree, I put the belt around the trunk, and I stuck the autograph book between the trunk and the belt and the pencil. And then I took some wax paper. There wasn't such a thing as tinfoil or baggies in those days, and covered it so that it would be protected from the rain. And I would go up into the top of that sycamore tree, and I would think about my life, and I'd write in the autograph book. Now, one of the things I would think about was why in the world I did not have the cleats from the bottom of the shoes of those boys that I liked, because the boys would give the girls the cleats to hang around their neck. And I'm sorry, but I didn't have the cleats from the guys I wanted. And I'd think about the squabbles I would have with my brother and sister. And I'd also think about what I was going to be when I grew up. And I want you to know that when I was a little girl up in the top of that sycamore tree, I would even think about being a missionary. I never thought about being a pastor because there was no such thing as women pastors in those days. But I'd think about what I was going to be. And then I'd write in the autograph book about that. I still have that autograph book packed away. My very first journal. And when I finally outgrew the tree, I shifted to other kinds of journals, sometimes tablets or bound books, and would write. And eventually I shifted to keyboards and computers and iPads and phones. But the practice was the practice of observing my life and writing about it, paying attention, being astonished, and telling about it. That was my journey as a child, as a youth, and has been my journey my whole life long. Somewhere in my faith formation, I was introduced to a very ancient practice called the daily examen. Do you know the daily examen? Yeah, you do. Ignatius of Loyola, back in, I think it was the 15th century, developed for his religious community, the Jesuits, a daily practice that at the end of the day, people would reflect on the course of their day and detect God's presence as it had been with them during the day and discern God's direction for them. It was a playback. It can be short, 5 minutes, but reviewing the day. And the traditional questions of Ignatius were questions like these: become aware of God's presence, review the day with gratitude, pay attention to your emotions, choose one feature of the day and pray from it. And there's some more contemporary questions we can ask. Any kinds of questions are good. Some that I like to ask are these: where have I experienced the disconnect? Or where have there been disconnections in this day? Where have there been connections? And then, where have been the nuggets of grace? Or what have I seen today? What have I heard? What have I tasted? What have I smelled? And how have these sensations made me feel? And what is the invitation and all that? And what will be my response? Or as a contemporary writer about the daily examen says, you can just simply name the sads, the glads, and the sorries. Let me say them again. The sads, what made me sad today? What made me glad today? And what am I sorry about? Any kind of questions that help you think about the course of the day are appropriate. Over time, this practice has moved me from the margins to the margins with 1 foot in the world and 1 foot out. Observer from the margin, in the world, participant. In and out, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. The daily examen helps us see with eyes wide open and then helps us determine how we're going to respond. Meister Eckhart, spirit guru, said, Your work is to find God always and in all ways, at all times, in all places, in any company, and in all ways. So there are a variety of settings in which we can practice the daily examine and pay attention to what's going on with us. One of the settings that evokes the presence of God for me is nature. A lot of you are out in the midst of nature, and you know about this. Thomas Aquinas said, sacred writings are bound in two volumes, that of creation and that of the Holy Scriptures. So observation while in nature can be a prompter of the presence of God in our lives. Let me tell you the story. One day, Charles and I were having breakfast. It must have been in May of 1 year, and when I was serving as bishop. And I began to describe to him some of the dynamics going on in the conference and said to him that I think I just decided I wasn't going to go to annual conference in June. So Charles, in his wisdom, helped me think about that. And finally, when I was insistent, he said, well, Sharon, you have to go. You're the bishop. So with that frame, I went out for my morning walk. And it was this wonderful, out in nature, wonderful hiking trail in our neighborhood. And I was walking along, and suddenly this tune began to stir in my mind. And it went something like this. You'll understand why I'm not a member of the choir, but it went da 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 da. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. So I began to think of the chorus, Lord, lift me up and let me stand, da-da, by heaven's tableland, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, set my feet on higher ground. So I came back. Charles, help me find the rest of this, the verses, the rest of this song. Well, he said, you know, that's in the Brown Cokesbury hymnal. I'm going to have to go find this Cokesbury hymnal. I said, fine. So he went off to the study to find the Cokesbury hymnal. And about that time, a friend in another state called me, and I explained to her what was going on. She said, I have the hymn right here. I'll fax it to you. I still have a copy of it stapled to my psalter. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's tableland, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, set my feet on higher ground. Well, I went to annual conference by faith, living from a higher perspective. It was one of the best annual conferences I'd ever been to. You hear how the movement of the Spirit wed with the commitment to reflect on what's going on and to name it and be astonished by it. So nature is one setting. Nighttime is another setting for me. And I would confess that I have next to my pillow a little notebook. Actually, it's a pretty big notebook. Next, and a pen. And I call it the place where I record my night visions. Now, I don't remember my dreams very well, but I'll wake up in the middle of the night and there'll be a phrase or a word going through my mind. And well, if I'm really honest with you, I'll turn on the light of my iPad and pick up my pen and just write it down and then go back to sleep. Another nighttime is liminal space between the two worlds where matter and spirit meet. And sometimes in that liminal space, there is a still small voice of God that speaks to us. So nature, nighttime, and I have to confess, another setting where I often get nudges is the shower. I mean, I'll just say it, in the shower, it happens. Maybe it's because I'm vulnerable, who knows? But I'll never forget one particular story. Again, it was a hymn, it was a tune of a song that came to me, and I kept singing, what is that? And it was a Beatles song called I Can Get By with a Little Help from My Friends. Now, I was under fire. You know, bishops are shock absorbers in the life of the church, so a lot is aimed at bishops, and I was getting it. And I thought, I can get by with a little help from my friends. So I went to the office that day, and the first thing I did was call a friend of mine who had been a friend of mine for years and years. And he and I talked, and it's helped me claim the perspective of the day. The point is that God speaks to us in a variety of ways in nature, in the night, in our showers. And I would even say, as hard as it is to do in the news, you know, I read 3 to 4 newspapers a day. I watch a lot of commentary. It's painful. And yet, in the midst of hearing all of that stuff, there are voices that speak to us about who we're called to be as a church and how we help people connect in an age of disconnect. So those are some of the settings. Paying attention is an internal activity that leads to a mindfulness complemented by meditation, contemplation, silence, focus, observation that can even be enhanced by the use of a camera. And that's what we're going to talk about now for a few minutes. A camera is a tool for seeing with eyes wide open. Now, I stumbled into photography. My dad and my aunt had cameras that they wore around their necks all the time, and they got me when I was a little girl, a Brownie box camera. Did you have one of those too? Oh gosh, it was just wonderful. And when I got out of seminary and was serving my first church, I actually set up a dark room in my basement. And I went to the local vocational school and took a dark room class and experimented with photography and development. And then I got busy and I sort of laid my camera aside. And it was only a year before I retired that I began to pick it up again and have in retirement taken classes and traveled the world to see by using my camera. Now, I have to say that it would be easy for us to say, well, I can't do that because I don't have a camera. And I want to say, reach in your pocket or your purse. Each one of us has a camera that we can use. And I would share with you that I just had 2 images juried into an exhibit at the Gordon Memorial Jewish Community Center. And I don't share that because I had them juried in there. I share it because one of them was made with an iPhone. The point is, you've got a camera, and you've got a good camera. And so we each can use that camera as a tool to help us pay attention and observe the presence of God in our lives and observe our neighbor. So I'm going to share with you some pictures of my visual journey and my visual journal. And they're just sort of random. And I put them in categories just so I'm going to share them pretty quickly. And just to give you, hopefully, a picture of the breadth and the scope of seeing to stimulate you to think about how you might see in your daily life. The particular image on the screen right now is one of connection. It's one of the church. The first category that I want us to look at is one of the places Charles and I go almost every day is to walk in the mall. And so I just carry my camera, my phone in my pocket. And when I saw this, I photographed it because I couldn't help but wonder about the little boy, little girl who was missing a balloon. Can you see are you getting, yeah, you're getting the whole picture. Good, okay. One day walking, there was this woman, it was her red purse. I saw her on the other side of the mall and I quickly moved over to get behind her. And I used intentional camera movement. You know, you can blur it on purpose. Intentional camera movement I use a lot. I was intrigued by that red purse and quietly moved up behind her. and took this photograph. And then one day I walked up behind a homeless woman walking through the Green Hills Mall, right next to the Burberry store. The juxtaposition of the expensive purses and her carrying all her possessions, perhaps, in the baby carriage, or the grocery cart, I'm not sure which it was pretty sobering to me. Stairs, abstracted, up and down. Time is under construction. Even the floor has a message, if you're looking. That decisive moment of unlocking the door. Images can be metaphors. You know, they're poetry. They can point to a reality that's larger than ourselves. What are the doors that we are unlocking in our lives? And then another setting where I look and see a lot is from my porch and balcony. And I'm out there every morning early. I started during the pandemic, sitting, eating breakfast on the porch as a way to get outside. And now I probably quit going out when it's about 35 or 40 degrees. I don't go any colder than that. I have blankets and heaters and all that sort of stuff. And if it's 95, I may not, and humid, I may not go out in the summertime, but almost every other morning I'm out there. And oh my gosh, the sky, you can just look at the sky. I go for drama. Every day there's drama. And then out on that porch, there are dead leaves. I get into the dead flowers, and I have to say that they're much more interesting to me than the fresh ones and flowers in their prime. And I'll get cut flowers at the grocery store and bring them home. And patients of Charles, he'll say, you think it's time to get rid of those flowers? Yeah. Oh, no, not yet. I've got to photograph them, and they're not quite ready to photograph. You can see what he puts up with by looking at this image. But leaves. And some that are in their prime. And a friend gave me some tubulars. These are Gloriosa, Joe. Gloriosa. Joe and I have had a conversation about Glorioso, very Gloriosa. These are Gloriosa, but they were oh so glorioso. But what amazed me about these is how I hadn't had a chance to brace them in time to the railing yet, and they started supporting themselves. Do you see these little curlicules in them where they were supporting themselves and not allowing themselves to fall? I used to live across from this place, and this was dawn and this was night, looking at the same building. La Sagrada Familia, Gary, taken in, weren't you, I think you were there recently. One of the things I like to do in an airport is to sit right on if I have a layover, sit in a chair and watch the feet go by and sit there with my camera and just photograph the feet. I sort of did that in Barcelona here with a group of pilgrims. Looking up. I mean, my goodness, look up. Look up. Oops, excuse me. I was looking out of a bus window in a city bus in Barcelona, and there were these three Muslim women standing there invited me to see. This one I love. This was taken in Tuscany. And I love the idea that maybe Mary had done the laundry that morning before she picked up Jesus and was taking care of him up there in the picture. The juxtaposition of the laundry and Mary and Jesus brought a smile to my face. Now, this is what you do when you're not driving. But one day a friend and I went out while we were having an ice storm here in Nashville. Nobody else was out, so we knew it was fine to go out. And both of us had experience of driving in the north in the ice. And the ice on the windshield added a nice flavor to the day. And as I walked into a community center for senior strength one day, there was a kid sitting there with his head on the table. And then I went to a convention center, to a conference, was walking around and looked up, and look what I saw. And down the hall, look what I saw. Light and shadow, and look what I saw in the convention center. And reflections. Oh, I have so many reflections. But think about reflections. All kinds, buildings and walls and water. Here's another reflection over at Edwin Warner Park. The story behind this is I was at, Butchart Garden in Vancouver, I think is where it was. Hot, humid, close to noon. And there's kind of murky, green pool of water. And I looked over to the right, and in the shade, there was this cluster of koi. And all of a sudden, as if on cue, they lined up and started swimming across the pool. I call this my koi conga. It's a conga line of and they just moved in single file across the pond. Have you ever been to Smithville Jamboree? You know Smithville Jamboree. We got rained out one year. But this woman was not stopped by it at all. I passed a ping pong table one day and looked out the window of a room in San Miguel de Allende. You wonder about people sitting in those chairs. One was turned over. Had they had an argument? Who knows? Then I walked out of a meeting at St. Simon Island, and there was this image, and there was this image. The course of the day, just walking around, looking, seeing, recording. This is my November 6th image. I walked out of Walgreens on the morning of November 6th, last week after the election. This is how I felt. And then the 2016 General Conference, just a couple images here. You'll remember there was a lot of contentiousness in the United Methodist Church, a very painful conference. And so I photographed on my iPhone the floor, the conference floor, which was scratched and gnarled. And I came home and I photographed Kleenex boxes. Kleenex gives you comfort when you are sad. And I put together my photographs of the floor with the photographs of the Kleenex boxes. And so that's what this is, to describe the lament and the hope that came, but primarily lament that came out of that general conference. Here's a second one of Kleenex box and floor. And don't forget your kitchen. Oh my, all kinds of things to photograph in the kitchen, from these eggs to these eggs. And then one day I pulled out the grater to grate cheese. And then I pulled out my camera and I named this Grate. 3 views of the grater. And good old kiwi. And good old red cabbage. Becomes almost a mandala, a reflective piece, a centering piece. And taken from my chair. Do you have a chair at your house? You know, I've been an itinerant pastor and moved, and my place of home has been my chair. And, you know, and my table, the table and the chair have been the places that have anchored me. And I looked up one day and saw this photograph. Light. And that's the ceiling right above it. I'm going to work with those angles somehow. I'm going to return to this one. Now, I have to say, another favorite place for me to photograph is the car wash. You know, and you don't have to worry about driving because, you know, it pulls you, you know. So I'll pull into the car wash. I'll get my wheels aligned in the rut, and I'll pull out my cell phone while I move through the car wash. Oh my gosh, how much fun. I will not show you all my car wash pictures. Too many. But I have to tell you what happened to the car wash. You can see abstract kinds of stuff that are going on, tail lights in front of you. And then coming out, I played with this one a bit, but coming out of the car wash on the other side. But I have to tell you that the last time I went to the car wash, they have put in new lights. Let me show you the new lights at the car wash. It's just amazing color. And oh gosh, I couldn't believe they've renovated the whole car wash. I'm sure it was just for me. My camera. Oh, what fun. What fun, what whimsy, what delight to go through the car wash. Now, I have to tell you also that sometimes, 2 things about this. One, I'm learning to put pictures together to tell a story. So that's another thing you can do when you look at your camera roll. Think about what pictures go together and how you might want to put them together. I took both of these while I was waiting for a doctor's appointment one day. You know, sometimes you have to wait a pretty long time. So I just went over to the window and photographed both of these views and put them together. And then one night I went to the zoo. I like to do blur. And so these were the people waiting in line to get on the hobby horses, the carousel. And so I took them separately and I put them together in this format. People watching life go by. It's the season. The middle one is what I called earlier intentional camera movement. Move your camera around, get all kinds of unusual things. I'm also working on a body of work about thin spaces. And this is actually 2 photographs put together, and it was taken in the new First United Methodist Church in Franklin. A few of us went over and just walked around, got permission to walk around and take photographs in there. And there's something about the thin space where matter and spirit meet that resonated with this image for me. chasing of the light or something. And this one also. I think I'm going to call this one Crossing Over, but I'm not sure. Letting go. Let me just say a word about this. Let me ask, are we aiming at 10 till 7 or 7? Do we have just 7? 7? Okay. All right. I'm watching a clock right here. So I am aware in my chapter of life, I have been surprised by the amount of loss and grief that is a part of my life at this chapter of my life. It's just part of the reality of being my age. My mother, who lived to be 100, would say every now and then to me, Sharon, some days I feel like I'm the only leaf left on the tree. And so I'm putting together some images and some words around grief and loss. This is one of the images. This one, the words are, she said to me, I put my mom in memory care today. I have words that go with this woman. She was, I was on the subway in Paris and looked out the window and she was sitting there. And I pulled out my iPhone and took a picture. And here are the words: alone, lonely, waiting, 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 waiting for the train. I was sitting with a friend in front of the Tennessee Department of Transportation, getting ready to go in and get my new Gold Star ID. Wasn't open yet. And so I reached for my iPhone and I took this picture through the front window. And that afternoon, I came home and listened to the news. And there was a story told by a Palestinian man about an event in Gaza. And here are the words that I wrote to go with this image. They're entitled Sans Solace, which is without solace. From the bombed building rubble, they pull a 1-year-old child, a beautiful girl. The men digging erupt in shouts of joy as they place her in the arms of her sobbing father. The commentator explains matter-of-factly, the father has lost 2 other children, his wife, 2 cousins, an aunt and uncle to the war. And then, only then, did the voice say, this little girl didn't make it. Her wounds were too much for her. Her wounds were too much for me. I see you, Palestinian man. I feel you, nephew, cousin, husband, and yes, father. Her wounds are too much for me. I weep with you, brother. Now I want to tell you this story about this next one. Before I pull it up, I want to tell you the story. I was on my way out first I'd read 2 articles in the New York Times, one about a Gazan teacher written by him, and it was entitled something like, children should be learning, not dealing with death. And he was writing about his being a teacher in Gaza and how ultimately his home was bombed and the family moved into the classroom. And the upshot was they were living in Syracuse, New York. And the same issue of the New York Times had an article by Margaret Wrinkle, you know Margaret Wrinkle here in town, talking about the disruption of children in North Carolina as a result of Hurricane Helene, and how, once again, they could not go to school, and there was not even internet connection, so they couldn't learn remotely, and the plight of the children. So I was carrying grief for the children of Gaza and the children of North Carolina and all the children of the world. And so I got my breakfast tray and I went to the door. It's a glass door. And I looked down as I turned the knob, and there, lying on the floor of the porch, was a mourning dove. And it was at least stunned. I was hoping he was only stunned, but his feet were up like this. And I looked and I saw no movement. And Charles came in about that time. I said, Charles, I said, there's, I think, a dead mourning dove on our porch. Now you need to understand, Charles has played the role of the ritual of the Grim Reaper, and he's the one who, when there's a mouse trap, he'll empty the mouse out, and when the poinsettia is dead in January, he'll take the poinsettia out to the garbage because I can't do that. And so he looked at me and said, well, what are you going to do about it? I thought maybe he didn't hear me. I said, Charles, I think he's dead. And Charles paused and said, well, what are you going to do about it? I thought, well, I think our 51-year agreement has just come to an end. And so I said to him, I thought for a minute, I thought I could take him on about this or be a little more evocative. But instead I said, Charles, I'm going to photograph him. So I went in and got a disposable latex glove or non-latex glove and went out and picked him up by his foot and got my light table and put it on the floor of the balcony and moved him over there and took photographs. And this is my photograph. 3 photographs. And this embodies for me the grief of the children too. You know, it's about the grief. Right now, I'm calling it Homage to a Mourning Dove. I'm just going to save those for another time. So you get the sense of being in tune, listening, examining internally, externally, recording, writing, as well as with photographs, and being present to the presence of God and neighbor and all that we do. So a next step for me, just so you know it's coming, is that I'm putting together my verbal and visual stuff with a blog. And it should be online, hopefully by next week. The name of it will be gatheringthefragments.org. So I'll just give you heads up about that. But that's to come. But here's some of my learnings, and then we'll talk about our takeaways from tonight. Through this lifelong practice of visual and verbal journaling, practicing the daily examine, I've learned that the first step toward observing is being still, just being quiet. You know, one of the things that struck me a couple of weeks ago, Paul preached on Bartimaeus, and there's Jesus, this blind man in the crowd, and calling out, and the line was so instructive. It said, Jesus stood still. Jesus stood still. And in the midst of that, he saw the blind man and helped the blind man see again. So One of the learnings has to do with being still. Another one has to do with that noticing invites curiosity, learning, creativity, and it disrupts my certainty. It calls us out of fear, and it promotes openness and resilience. Third learning is that noticing takes us deeper and deeper in a way that leads towards centeredness and mindfulness. Fourth learning is that noticing leads us toward a sense of wonder and creates a pivot point within me, a flexibility and a responsiveness. And the fifth learning and last is that noticing helps me gain perspective. My mission of my life is to see as God sees, to hear as God sees, to know as God knows, and to love as God loves. And noticing both verbally and visually helps me do that. So I've told you my quirky story, some of the stories. I've showed you some of my visual images. Let's talk about takeaways. What do you want to say about the practice of observation as a means to helping you fulfill your mission and helping us to be the church of increasing love of God and neighbor? What one or two takeaways that you might have from tonight that you want to either think about or do or what? Yeah, Bill. The what?
About 2 weeks ago, I went to the pantry and opened up some olives that I had sampled about 3 or 4 weeks before. And there was a green film on top that was beautiful. But I took a spoon and took it all off. And I like olives, so I just tried to get about 4 or 5 or 6 of them that were not stained. And I ate them. And I paid for it. 2 weeks later, I was at the sink and I saw something that I couldn't believe. It was a little tiny stink bug, and he was darting around close to where there was a spider web. And he got caught in the spider web. And all of a sudden, this great big huge spider comes out, and he goes back in, and then he comes back out again, and he captures the stink bug, and he gets right on top of the stink bug for just a second. Then all of a sudden, he releases it and goes back and goes to the side, and he's dead. So the stink bug got him. So that has something to do with my olives. Be careful what you eat.
What a great story. Any other comment? I've been standing. I've got to get some circulation in my feet here. Now let's just talk about resources and call the evening. Was there something else? Oh, good. Yeah, here.
I was just going to resonate with your daily examine and the value of looking back over the day. Whenever I do that, and that's a regular practice for me. I remember things. I guess I see things, but I remember things that I didn't notice at the time. You know what I mean? So one thing, this is an example. About a week ago or 2 weeks ago, on Sunday evening, I was reflecting on the day. Actually, Monday morning. I do it the next morning on that day, and I suddenly, in trying to kind of jotting down things, I suddenly became aware of a person who was actually sitting to my right, and during the class time, but who never said a word. And I never was really very aware. But suddenly I became aware that he was sitting there. And so I called him and said, let's have coffee. But it was like, wow, why did that come to mind? So I just resonate with the way you did develop.
It's time for us to adjourn, but let me just call your attention to the piece of paper I just handed you. It has a couple resources on it. I'm looking for my copy here. Why don't you hand me one? Great, thanks. Thanks, Jane. Some of it's stuff I've already said, but I want to point you to this particular book called Sleeping with Bread, Holding What God Gives, Holding What God Gives You Life. Holding What Gives You Life. It's written for families so children can understand it too, but it's the Daily Examine, a nice resource. Also, Mary Jo Hoffman, who was an astrophysicist turned visual artist, who's written a book called Noticing. For 12 years on her morning walk, she gathers things to photograph. She's been doing it every day for 12 years. You can go to Instagram and find her work. So I think that's all I want to call your attention to on this piece of paper. And for those of you who are on Zoom, I would say that most of the stuff has already been talked about. But I would, so you already know what it is, but if you would like a copy, I would be glad to email it if you want to email me, and I will email you a copy of this list of resources. But I would just simply close with Mary Oliver's words of pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it. And it's all for the purpose of connection. Thank you very much.